progress. There you go. So we've got over 100 people have registered, and we do need to follow some procedures. As Jeremy Paxman would say, you know the rules. I won't waste the time, but obviously, please stay muted unless you're particularly due to speak. After the three speakers have made their presentations, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions and contribute to the discussion. We're going to say, can you please not put things in chat during the discussions, because otherwise they flash up in the middle of discussions. With 100 people, it's quite distracting. So if you've got a question, if you wouldn't mind just noting it down, and then try to be the first one when we say right questions and answers. So we'll do that. So we won't use the chat while we're going on unless it's particularly relevant to what the speaker is talking about. So the agenda for the evening is here. Let's share. It's kind of one of these. There we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. We've got Jenny Morissetti. Jenny is a qualified retrofit consultant. She's also a Dorset Climate Action Network trustee and a keen climate campaigner. Then Jason Hawke is the energy officer for Magna Housing Association and also chairman of a regional future construction skills group. So dealing with how we get more skill sets within the building community. And finally, we've got Andy, who is built up a huge wealth of knowledge by doing up not one house, but two houses with extraordinarily deep retrofit projects. And he's got a lot to say about materials and the process. So after that, we will have a question and answer session. We hope to have 10 minutes at the end just to talk a little bit about Dorset Greener Homes and the practical steps we could take to campaign for better retrofits. Colin's going to talk a little bit about membership of DCAN, and then we'll have a virtual pub after a 5-minute break to fill your glasses for an informal chat. I'm hoping that Jenny and Jason can stay, and if Andy can, that would be great. So I'll stop sharing at that point. So after the evening, we will be sending around some notes to all the participants with all the useful contacts. So you don't need to write everything down. We'll be sending you that later in the day. So if I could hand you over to Jenny for basic principles of retrofit.
Good evening. Just bear with me while I. Oh, sorry, I've got a problem here already because my full screen won't let me share the screen. Right, there we are. So hopefully you can now all see my screen. Sorry about that. I just thought before I start with my talk, I just mentioned briefly how I got into retrofitting. When I left the Navy, we bought a fairly dilapidated property which needed a lot of work doing to it. So that sparked my interest in renovating and conserving an old building. I then did a degree in restoration and decorative studies. Then we moved to our current property, which was even more derelict than the last one. I learnt how to lime plaster, mix my own lime paint. I set up a building company, and then 4 years ago, I did the course, or I qualified as a retrofit assessor, specialising in traditional buildings. So that just gives you some background. So here we have, this is in fact our current property that and the part of the building closest to you didn't exist when we purchased it. So one of the particular reasons for looking at the whole house approach is you need to think of the different elements that your property may consist of. So here we have the furthest away section, approximately 500 years old, and the middle section, Victorian, and then a fairly new built with Ziegel blocks construction. Apologies if my voice sounds a bit strange. I've had a sore throat for a while. So next slide. And here we have a more modern property, which would probably have cavity walls. My point about traditional buildings is pre-1919, most properties didn't have cavity walls. So different methods of retrofitting would be carried out. Carbon emissions from buildings are 30 to 40%. So you can see it's a huge amount, and definitely something needs to be carried out, done to alter that. Sorry. An EPC is recommended as a starting point. If I was in an audience, I'd ask you to raise your hands to see how many people have had an EPC carried out, but I don't think that would be very successful as I can't see many screens here. I think you'd probably be surprised to find out the photograph I showed you at the first count, we're now a B-rated property. So when people say listed buildings or old buildings can't improve their energy efficiency, hopefully in these slides I'll show you how that was achieved. Before we start anything else, it's important to think of the energy hierarchy. It's more important to save energy than to worry about what kind of energy you're generating or you're using. So the first thing is to assess the property and put in energy saving measures, which again we'll look at in a minute. So how to make your home more energy efficient and what to do before you add expensive energy saving measures. So the first thing is to make a plan. Is your home operating to a peak performance? We service our cars regularly, but does everybody treat their properties in the same way? Do you give it an annual inspection? So you can see here how dilapidated the rear of the property was. So you want to make a condition report, walk around the outside of the property. Often keen gardeners add more and more compost to their flower beds next to the walls. So have the air bricks been blocked up? Is drainage sufficient? Our rainfall has increased a huge amount, and we get very heavy rainfall now. Are the gutters capable of coping with the excess water? And also more important to make sure there aren't any parts of the guttering that's come apart, that the downpipes are of a sufficient size and the drains aren't blocked. What state is the mortar in? It may have different types of mortar. It may have some cement render, some lime mortar. So again, check on that. And if you're about to carry out any work, then repointing so that it's consistent and preferably lime would ease other conditions. So downpipes and gutters we talked about. Windows and doors, including frames, that can be another point where drafts come in. And if there's a small amount of rot, that will easily spread. So making sure that everything is in good order. And are the chimneys functioning? If they are, then they need to be cleaned regularly. And what type of roof do you have and in what state is it in? Because even a small crack can allow water to ingress, so that needs to be repaired swiftly. So this was the state of the back of our property, and I was informed that the tiles, the method that had been used was a farmer's construction, which meant that every other tile, instead of overlapping to the full amount, had more gaps than it should do. So here it is once everything has been restored, except you can see in the center of the lower section, that there's a section of repointing that needs to be done there. And the rear of the property, again, rampant plants and ivy in this case, definitely not a good idea. And here we have it renovated. And just notice the what is the wood store there, because that will come up again later on in its new function. So the idea is to add fluff before bling. So as much insulation and draft proofing as is possible. So the heat loss, it's useful to know where most heat is lost, and through the walls, 35%. In an older property, it's very difficult to tackle insulation on the walls, because often if it's listed, you can't add insulation externally or internally. So if you have the opportunity, as we had, because the plaster had fallen off most of the walls, we added Leica balls, which are small clay balls, which give an insulation property and help with condensation. But I know that's not possible in most renovation projects. So here we're looking at easy wins, which would be windows and the roof. So with the heating, warm air is bad for your blood pressure. So it's much more healthy to be in a cool house. So wear extra jumpers instead. Radiators cause hot spots and heat the ceiling. So if at all possible, you want to try and have underfloor heating, wood burners, making sure that you use very dry wood, and internal temperature should be around 16 to 18 degrees. And is your house heat pump ready? So this is the way, one of the ways to become heat pump ready, but again, it is a rather drastic intervention. But our floors had rotted away, so we were able to replace them with a crushed glass and then limecrete with underfloor heating inside. So here we see the final coat of limecrete going on top. And this was quite an easy finish to deal with, because it was just simply waxed. And then there we, so no carpets or anything else on top of it. So for insulation in the roof, there are several places that can be insulated. So underneath the tiles, we reinstated sarking board. The loft floor had been boarded, but most of that hoovered up, so there wasn't much left. And then sheep's wool was put in between, or rather under, I've got a photograph there, sheep's wool, and this was Axminster carpet byproduct, but you probably can't get that anymore. So boarded floor, loft, and always make sure that you're ventilating if you're insulating, because any condensation can cause timbers to rot. So we talked about like vented chimneys, hydrothermal assessment to measure the heat, vapor and moisture. It's very important to make sure that you've got the correct balance. Windows, make sure that if you can have secondary glazing and attach that with metallic strips, sorry, I'm just thinking, magnetic strips rather. Draft proofing, this, make sure the loft hatch is draft proofed, spare room and so on. Internal shutters, blinds, insulated curtains can in fact add just as much warmth to a room as can double glazing. It's a test carried out by the SPAB. Maximize your natural light, and then you won't need so much energy use for light bulbs. Daylight tubes. I'm just speeding up a little bit because I'm conscious of time. And again, water heating. I was quite surprised once we'd had our ground source heat pump put in that it didn't seem to be working very well. And in fact, the thermostat on the new hot water cylinder had been turned up to 70. So we weren't getting any heat in the rooms. but 45 degrees is a recommended temperature for your hot water tank. And floors, if you can insulate below the floor, then so much the better. But if not, then those are some natural flooring that could be used. Wall finishes, it's very important if you have a traditional property to use lime plaster, allowing the property to breathe. As soon as you wrap the house in plastic, either from paint or plaster, you're going to have problems with condensation. So where you can, choose natural paints like earthborn. They've now reintroduced soya paint, casein paint you can mix yourselves as well, but not like this. So here comes the bling. So in our property, we've got 2 Sonnen batteries, which hold 22 kilowatts from the PV panels that we have on our barn roofs. And in a different setting, you can have a battery fitted into the kitchen and all the equipment fitted into a very neat cupboard. It's been beautifully made by one of our attendees. So heat pumps, there they are, fitted into what was the wood store at the back of the house. And this was our first trench for the ground source array, which it started off well, but few problems when it starts to get wet and muddy. If you're undergoing this type of thing now, you need to use PAS 2035 and engage either an architect who can carry out some of those roles. But I believe this is going into further detail later on, so I'm not going to dwell on that. So now it's time to take action. Have an EPC done. Insert a smart meter, because once you're measuring your energy, you'll be saving energy. Carry out a condition survey and an occupancy assessment. It's very important to understand the energy use and the inside a property, because if there's one person living in there, obviously there'll be a huge difference from if you've got 5 people permanently resident. Create a retrofit strategy and also work out the cost analysis. Trigger points are an important factor, because you might be building an extension or changing your heating system, and that's a good chance to then look at what else you could do at the same time. So I can send out these slides that have got the details of relevant grants and so on separately. So I'm just going to, we've got one place I would recommend for first looking at is the Centre for Sustainable Energy. They really do have some very good information. And also the Green Register, if you're wondering where to find a builder with the right credentials, the Green Register ensures that anyone registered with them carries out some of their training. So what's there? And the Cheese Project, I don't know if you've heard about that, but you can, there's a franchise now for thermal imaging surveys, and that will be another useful resource. So that's all. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. The number of AECB members and the number of Green Directory people seem to have a big hole around where Dorset is. If you look at the map, they're all in Somerset and Devon and Hampshire, but we're very backward on all this, as we are on lots of other things. So do you want to stop sharing that? Thank you, Jenny. Thank you very much. So we'll come back to questions later. And can we go straight to Jason? Going to talk about Magna and about training.
Can you hear me and see this?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so I am, sorry, the slideshow has been a bit slow. There we go. I'm Jason Hawkes. I'm the Energy Officer at Magna. My background 30 years ago was as a carpenter, and I did a master's in environmental architecture, and then I formed like a multidisciplinary practice in London where we did lots of energy efficiency design and retrofit and the like. And then I went into academia and taught, and now I work in social housing, trying to put all that into practice. So one of my roles at Magna is as the program lead for our 20-year retrofit program. Magna's got 8,300 homes, mostly in West Dorset and West Somerset. And we put in a bid as part of a consortium from the region for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which was run by Bays at the time and is now under the beautiful name of DESNES. And we were awarded 1.4 million to go towards our project. And we put 1.8 million in. Our long-term plan starting in 2 years' time when this project finishes. So this is a real learning curve for us as an organisation. We plan to spend £100 million in the next 20 years, making all of our homes as near to zero carbon as we can. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the history and the context of retrofit, the standards that Jenny's touched on as well, what we need to consider, what our challenges are and what our opportunities are. So once it was kind of decided that actually, yes, we do need to decarbonise as a nation, several programs were put in place. One of the first of which was the Retrofit for the Future program, which looked at several demonstrator projects, which were trying to reach 80% carbon reduction. Heavily funded, most of them failed. And the reasons for that failure were then dissected, and a post-mortem was taken place, and then a report called Each Home Counts was commissioned to see how on earth we could, if we couldn't get this right when we were measuring it to the eyeballs and throwing lots of money, how on earth could we do it on a grand scale of the 26, 27 million homes in the country that will need retrofitting. So there were quite a lot of burnt fingers, but that report came out and really was the underpinning for the current standards that we're seeing. And some of the things that were going wrong was that we weren't considering everything that was necessary. We weren't looking at detailing very well. We didn't have the skills to do it. We didn't necessarily have the materials or the drawings for builders to follow. So what you're seeing there in the top left is where there was no insulation put in window reveals. So you're creating a cold spot, which anyone who's lived through this winter and underheated their home is probably seeing something potentially similar in similar places. We weren't speccing correctly, or contractors weren't actually following the specification, because the detail required for retrofit is much greater than most contractors and builders are generally used to. You know, we're used to a fairly standard one-size-fits-all approach, and it doesn't necessarily work for retrofitting. We didn't work out detailing around things like pitched roofs, around window reveals, around doors, and so on. And then what we didn't quite get our heads around as an industry was, if you insulate, you must ventilate, because any cold spot then is likely to attract even more moisture, because we're still putting, as a, you know, average families are putting anywhere between 4 and 13 kilos of water into the atmosphere in their homes every day. Now, most of that, it's not visible, you don't think about it, but if I came around your house with a 10-litre bucket and threw it at the wall every day and then walked out and said, deal with that, you'd soon sort of start to concentrate your thoughts on it a little bit more. But that's essentially what we're doing, is we're putting all that moisture into our homes every day, and we are not dealing with it. And as you make a building more insulated and more airtight, that moisture finds it much, much harder to escape. So Each Home Counts led to the formation of the publicly available standards, PAS 2030 and PAS 2035. So PAS 2035 is the management standard for retrofit. So it details the process that you go through to make sure that your assessment is correct, that you're putting the right measures in, that the work is carried out well, and that you evaluate what goes on afterwards. And PAS 2030 is the installation standard that all installers and contractors are required to submit to. So they're umbrella standards. They require accreditation, but you should get better outcomes. because there should be better quality control and better quality assurance than we've seen in the past, because it isn't just a builder coming along, doing some stuff, walking away. No one knows what goes on afterwards. The process is much more detailed, and as you can see at the bottom there, it says PAS 2030 installation. A whole host of other things have to happen. Now this, I've got to make clear that PAS 2030 and PAS 25 currently only apply to funded work. But if anyone's thinking of doing their own home, of retrofitting their own home, I really strongly urge you to find PAS 2035 professionals and PAS 2030 installers, because they'll just have a much better understanding of the building physics required in order to do a successful retrofit. So the process starts off essentially with a retrofit assessor who does a really in-detailed site visit, the same sort of thing that Jenny was talking about. And then that gets passed over to a retrofit coordinator and a retrofit designer. And they come up with the process, the measures that are going to take place. And then the retrofit coordinator essentially project manages that project all the way through from that point up to handover. That's a very simplified approach there, but that's essentially it. But you've got to take into account things like energy performance, your ventilation strategy, insulation and moisture movement, air tightness, your heating strategy, statutory approvals, whether it's a traditional building, are you in a conservation area? There's so many things to consider in order to get it right. And the retrofit assessor is there to ensure that the designer and the coordinator have all the information they need in order to put a successful program together. Only then do you get a specification, and only after that do you start doing the installation work. And then there's rigorous procedures to follow for commissioning, handover of the building and all of the technologies and measures that are put in place. And then you come back and evaluate it. Depending on the risk that you follow, depends on how much post-project evaluation has to take place. So just to sort of contextualize where we are in the Southwest, Magna's got 8,300 homes. We're part of a larger group of social housing providers called Advantage Southwest, and there are 150,000 odd homes in the Southwest. But the Southwest itself has 2 million homes. What that means, within Advantage Southwest, we need to retrofit 115 homes a week, every week for 25 years to zero carbon standard. That's really a big deal. The Construction Industry Training Board thinks that nationally, we're going to need another 350,000 full-time equivalent roles in zero carbon retrofit on all types of work of the industry. So whether that's technical management through to installers, and we're going to need them within the next 5 or 6 years. The table at the top there just extrapolates the measures that we may have to put in the Southwest just in social housing. So that's just in the 10% of the homes in the Southwest that are in social housing. You can see there that we anticipate we're going to have to do something like 120,000 installations of external wall insulation. And the last time I looked, there were 3 companies in the Southwest that were accredited to do that at PAS 2030 standard, and they employed a total of 22 people. So frankly, we're frightened because we've got £100 million to spend. Every association is going down that same route. This is not one that we're going to have the rug pulled out from. We're going to do this because it's the best thing we can do for our residents. We're only 10% of the market, but we're the most mature section of the market so far. But we're scared because currently the funding that's around now for this social housing decarbonisation fund is pushing the existing skills base, the existing contractor base, absolutely to its limits. And this is 2 years before we take off our programme that is much more wider scale. This is long before the able to pay or the private rented sector are a mature market. So this is not necessarily about will, it's actually about ability to achieve our aspirations here. So this is why I, because of my mixed background, I'm chairing the social housing and regional education subgroup of GCAP, which is the Green Construction Advisory Panel, which runs out of Exeter College. It's a multi-disciplinary, multi-method and multi-industry approach to seeing how we can tackle the lack of future skills when it comes to construction and construction management. The considerations we have to take place. So this is purely from a Magna perspective, but this is the sort of thing that I have to tease everything out of, is obviously we have to consider our residents. We have to consider their health. We have to consider their age, other vulnerabilities they might have. Do we have to decant them? If we're going to do 500 homes a year, do we have 500 empty homes to decant those residents into, or do we decide we don't want to do that at all? And therefore we have to tailor our approach to retrofit around that. The biggest single issue that would cause us to decant is if we did floor insulation, but there are ways to achieve the PAS 2035 standard without having to do floor insulation. So our pilot project is essentially to see what we can do, what we can actually do in order to make sure that our program over the next 20 years is successful. Do we do it in one visit or in many visits? So do we say we're going to do a whole house retrofit in one go, or are we going to do this year and a few things in 5 years' time and a few things in 10 years' time? All of the evidence coming back from residents around the country when they've been going through consultation processes is they'd rather do it in one visit, if at all possible. They do understand in some cases that their heating might be fairly new, so we're not going to just throw a good heating system out. And so there might be follow-up visits. Our existing and future programs. Our housing stock is on cyclical replacement programs, so windows every 30 years, roofs every 75 years. How do we integrate those into retrofit? As Jenny was saying, trigger points. There are trigger points. So where do we align those programs? How do they fit in with our existing EPC results? And how do we make that all fit together? What's our future funding going to look like? This current wave of funding is wave 2, and it was predicted it would go up to wave 8, but the fear is that this might be the last one, after which we're on our own 2 feet. So those are things we need to consider. What are the regulations we need to follow? If you've all seen an EPC with the rainbow as to where how your house performs, social housing providers have to get all of their homes to EPC C by 2030. And we have to get to zero carbon, whatever that means yet, because no one's really decided, by 2050. So that's the regulatory framework we have to work under as well. We've also got the impending 2035 date when we're not allowed to fit new gas boilers. We want to beat that, but we don't want to swap a gas boiler for an air source heat pump and immediately put our residents into fuel poverty, because the cost of the unit of energy is so much higher for electricity than it is for gas. And what's our stock profile? How old is it? What measures do we need to take with it? Are there homes that we're never going to get to zero carbon? And there's an ethical consideration to think about there, because we would normally have said, okay, it's not cost effective to renovate this home, so we'll sell it, we'll dispose of it. Some sections of social housing will say, well, that's not fair, you're just passing the problem on. Other sections will say, yes, but at the same time, we have to be able to put our residents into homes they can afford to heat. So that's an ongoing discussion, which is always interesting to be a part of. The other thing we've seen in the last 40 years is that the right to buy has meant we've had to sell lots of the homes that we own. And therefore, when we are looking at a street, we might only own half of those homes, and they might all be semi-detached homes. Very, very difficult to retrofit one home if it's semi-detached with another home that you don't own. So we need to take all those things into consideration. We need to look at our leaseholders, our shared owners, and then to try and engage with owner-occupiers in those adjoining properties to see if they're willing to carry out the measures. Can we carry some of that risk? Can we carry some of that financial debt? Can we find funding to help them do that? So these are all the things that we have to tease out in order to put this 20-year program together. And so there are a lot of challenges. Skills and accreditation I've already touched on. The supply chain, if I look at the current project we're doing, our 87 homes we're doing in the next 2 years, the supply chain now is looking at a 16 to 20 week lead time to order and deliver the insulation necessary, which means that if I want to do work in September, which is quite late in the year for doing external wall insulation, I need to have ordered the material already. And given the constraints of a government-funded program, which I won't go into, but I could bore you rigid on, that makes my life very difficult. Infrastructure is very difficult. Last year, we fit some solar arrays to some homes in some small villages in Exmoor. Normally, the permission from, say, Western Power Distribution, whoever owns the local grid, would take 2 weeks, but post-COVID, that's taken 20 weeks. We fitted these solar panels last March, and we've still not been able to turn and commission the systems properly. So we have to take all these things into consideration. We have to plan ahead a long way. We've got the problems of climate change coming. Jenny touched on increased rainfall. We've also got, we live in what's called exposure zone 4, most of Dorset and Somerset. So we get the most horizontal rain in the country. So our fabric, our buildings need to be robust enough to deal with that. The detailing needs to be robust enough to keep that moisture out. But we also have the sunniest part of the country. So our buildings of the future and the buildings we retrofit also need to be resilient against overheating. So we've got a lot of challenges to face. We need to take into account the fact that our residents are generally those who are least resilient to financial shocks. So a lot of residents have gone into fuel poverty. So how do we help them? How do we prioritise their needs when we're doing retrofit as well? And alongside that comes damp and mould. And since the very sad case of the boy last year who died, the regulator is on the back of social housing quite strongly, and quite rightly too. But recent energy price increases have meant that we are getting a lot more damp and mould. Now, a lot of it is down to under ventilation and under heating. I'm not saying that we've got perfect buildings, because we haven't. But there's a huge amount of education and help that we need to give people. And a lot of housing associations are trying to link their retrofit and damp and mould strategies together, which, okay, it's good, because if you do retrofit right, you should cure damp and mould. But actually, retrofit's a 20-year program, and a lot of houses won't wait that long to have their damp and mould cured. So those are our constraints and our challenges, but there are opportunities for everybody. There's funding available. So again, Jenny touched on Eco4 and HUG, and you've also got LEAP. For Dorset, you've got a primary example of where to go. So one thing you have got well in Dorset that we don't have in Somerset is a delivery partner. So you've got Ridgewater Energy. So anyone who is looking at accessing Eco4 or the Home Upgrade Grant or LEAP, you can go straight to Ridgewater Energy, or you can contact someone like John Bird at Healthy Homes Dorset, or I'm sure you've all got contacts yourselves. There are opportunities for businesses in all this. We've got a massive skills shortage. If you're a contractor, social housing, if you can get the right accreditation and the right skill set, social housing is going to give you 20 years worth of work. And that's irrespective of whether the able to pay or private rented market matures or not. There are opportunities for individuals. There's a lot of training out there that's free. Anyone can now sign up to the Retrofit Academy Level 2 award in retrofit awareness. All of you can do that. You can all do that tomorrow. It's available to anybody to do that. And that's the beginning of your journey to becoming a professional retrofit assessor or a retrofit coordinator. I'm both. I've done both. And I'm also a level 3 DEA, so I do energy performance certificates. But those are the sort of 4 levels to becoming the utmost retrofit professional there is. So if you've got any building knowledge at all, go and find those programs and get on there. There are opportunities for communities. So Bridport Town Council, we love them. They're really good. You know, they've gone to CSC and they've got their energy champions trained. We're trying to work with them as much as we can to see what we can do about Bridport as a town with its zero carbon ambitions. And that's really exciting. It's exciting for us as well, because we know we're helping them and they're helping us, and we're doing the right thing for communities. If you live in a street of owner-occupiers, talk to each other, because it's going to be a lot cheaper to do retrofit on all your homes at the same time than it would be if you tried to do them individually, and a lot more technically challenging doing it individually as well. And that's me.
Wow, that's something to think about. Thank you very much, Jason. It's you covered a huge amount of ground, and that's it's the damp that's the problem, isn't it? So Andy, you're going to talk about doing up Wheelbrick Mill.
Yeah. Okay. Sharing my screen. Okay. We're at the opposite end of scale from Jason. We are private individuals. We've got a limestone rubble built converted mill and barn, which means that it's made of completely porous limestone. Our EPC was F, and so we were setting out on a journey to try and change all of that. We were lucky. We couldn't find any highly qualified people to work with us who really knew about sustainability. So we took on builders and plasterers and roofers who we knew and who knew each other and who trusted each other, and they learned eventually, I hope, to trust us. So what were the issues that we were facing? I said to you, it's a converted mill and barn. It's an agricultural building. It wasn't built to be a dwelling. So it has one benefit, which is it's got 20-inch stone walls. There's lots of roof area. And Jenny was telling you that 25% of the heat is going out through the roof. And there is another 35% going out through the walls. So those are the two areas I'm going to talk about today. I'm not going to focus so much on air source heat pumps and PV panels, although they are part of our solution. It was very expensive to heat, cost us over £5,000 in energy costs per year. Some of the main walls were south facing because they're limestone, they're highly absorbent, they were permanently damp. The damp was causing mold and staining of wall painting. You could paint a wall and it would be stained again 6 months later. It was drafty because our doors and windows didn't fit properly, and it was converted to a dwelling as opposed to effectively an agricultural building using 1980s technology, and I'll say some more about that in a moment. So before the plan, we were intelligent enough to shout help, and we found an architect who was a specialist in retrofit. And he said, I don't think you really need an architect. What you need is a building physicist. We'd never heard of a building physicist, but these are people who really understand sustainable materials and how they work together. So they came down to see us. They measured up everything. They asked us lots of questions about how the house was built, what it was made of, and they put all of that information into a software program called Woofy Pro. But what Woofy Pro does is it models just how thick your insulation materials need to be in order to give you the maximum possible insulation without reducing breathability to the point that you are starting to get moisture forming. They calculated the heating loads. We told them we wanted it to fit air source heat pumps or a pump or pumps, and they told us what kind of output we would need. And they recommended mechanical ventilation. Now, Jason said to you that if you insulate, you must ventilate. And that is absolutely right. If you're going to get all that damp coming out through the insulation, you've got to get it away. And that's what the mechanical ventilation is for. So the plan, we wanted to use sustainable materials throughout. We had to put a new roof over the main part of the property. Wasn't our choice. It was actually rotted around all of the bottom of the rafters. We needed breathable internal wall insulation. I said I wasn't going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but part of the plan was PV panels and a 5 kilowatt Tesla battery and two 8.5 kilowatt Mitsubishi Ikedan air source heat pumps, a mechanical ventilation and heat recovery system. We chose Zender Q350 on the recommendation of GreenGauge. And lastly, we did our best to fix all the drafts. We had somebody come in and draft proof every door and put in a lot more Velux in order to bring in as much natural light as possible. So we wouldn't have to have the lights on all the time, which we had prior to that. In the middle of a summer's day, if you went into many of the rooms, you'd need to turn the light on, and we wanted to fix that. So the external walls. It's a lovely stone building. We didn't want to put anything on the outside of the wall. We wanted to focus on insulating the inside of the walls. So they are, all of them, insulated internally to 90 millimeters in multiple layers. First thing was we hacked all the plaster off back to the stone and made good. We then put on 40 millimeters of breathable insulating iron, and I'll tell you what that is a bit later. We then had 40 millimeters of wood fiber panels, which were fixed on using recycled plastic fittings, which wouldn't transmit heat out into the wall. Finished with breathable lime plaster finish, 10 mil, and then breathable paint, which Jenny's also referred to. So on the left there, you can see what one bedroom looked like after we'd hacked off all of the plaster. This was above the mill room. It's over 200 years. It's been repaired many, many times. You've got brick in there. You've got little bits of concrete. You've got bits of timber, which had rotted away to powder. And in the bottom right there was the state we had to get it to in terms of making good before we could start to plaster it, put on the first layer of plaster. These are the materials that we used. So there's a product called E-Cork, which is sustainable, it's breathable, it's made of natural materials, hydraulic lime plaster, it's got cork in it, hence the name, and some other fun stuff as well, sort of ground up seashells and things like that. We used a variety of wood fiber panels. We were really struggling at this point to actually source the materials that we decided that we needed. We were going all over the south of England and beyond, trying to find wood fiber panels because they were incredibly in short supply. We used Sticotherm, we used one or two others. And the breathable lime plaster, the 10 mil coat, is something called Solo One Coat. And I can't remember what the breathable paint was, but there are many around. This is what the wood fiber boards looked like, and you can see those recycled plastic plugs which are used to hold it in place. These ones are actually tongue and groove to give them a more airtight fit. And I've included this to show you that once you've got those in place, then you can channel your electrics in on top of them and run those down before you put on the last coat of plaster. So I can answer questions about any of that later, but turning to the roof, I mentioned that we had rot. And the reason because the thing in the 1980s that you would put on impermeable black plastic membrane as your roofing felt. What our builders discovered was that, of course, every time it gets cold, then any moisture that's in the house will condense on the underneath of that, and it will run down to the base of the rafters, which will be permanently wet. And the base of most of our rafters had rotted away, and the wall plates had rotted away as well, just because of that. The recommendation from Green Gauge was to bring the lofts into what they called the warm envelope. So prior to that, we had done what Jenny had done, which was that we had laid boards down and we had put sheep's wool on top of those, and the loft space was cold. They recommended that if we were going to replace the roof, that it would be a good idea to bring the loft space into the warm envelope, which we proceeded to do, starting with creating an airtight layer inside the existing roof timbers. So, you know, on the inside of the existing rafters, most of which we didn't have to replace, we just had to repair the bases of them. So there was extra bits strapped on all the way along. We then inserted wood fiber between those existing rafters, 80 mil thick. They're not very substantial, but they were a bit closer together than rafters are nowadays. And we then added counter rafters, which were much deeper and enabled us to put a much thicker layer. So we had 140 plus 80, we had 220 mil of flexible wood fiber, so-called Pavaflex from the Pavatex company. On top of that, we had more wood fiber sarking board. And then on top of that, and lastly, battens, and then counter battens for an air gap to hang the tiles on. So that increased the height of our roof by almost a foot, which created its own problems, but we had really good people to work with who could sort through all of that. And I have to say, this is where I think we were fantastically lucky. We tapped into what we laughingly called the Frome Mafia, which is basically a group of tradespeople who are really good in the Frome area where we are, and they all know each other, and they'll only work with each other. So if you get one, you get them all. And that was a pair of builders, a pair of roofers, and a pair of plasterers who had access to one or two other people. And none of them were specialists in retrofitting, but they're bright people. And we wanted to work with them in a collaborative way. So we talked to suppliers. At least one of them actually had been trained by one of those suppliers, a company called Mike Y, over the other side of Devon. Our approach with them was to be collaborative. Every time we had a problem, we talked with them. We were up on the roof with them every day, talking about, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? They were prepared to spend the weekends reading through data sheets in order to figure out how to use these materials that none of us had ever come across before. And they did it really well. In order to try and save massive cost, where we could, we did things ourselves. I couldn't find somebody who would be prepared within our time frame to spray the airtight coating onto that skin of plywood that you see there. So I bought a sprayer and I taught myself to do it. So those are my feet, you can see there. It was not as difficult as I thought it was. I still have that sprayer. So if anybody else wants to do this, give me a call. I've put it into deep storage, and you're very welcome to buy it off me at a very modest price. That's what that section looks like when it's been a bit further developed. That's one of our roofers and one of our builders talking to each other about how they're doing the timber work just there. And I said, to save cost, we did as much as we could. That's my dear wife, balanced on one foot on top of the roof, who is putting in the 80mm boards into the existing gaps between the rafters before we put on the big ones on top. So these are the things I've talked about. For the air tightness layer, we had to put in a 12mm plywood sheet, except in places where there was plasterboard already on the inside of the rafters. And we sealed that with passive purple. And in fact, if I just go back a couple of things, there's you can see that there's some white here and there. That's another product from the same company, which you use to just make sure you've got an absolutely airtight situation where there is timbers going across. We used a variety of flexible wood fiber bats. We couldn't do it all with Pavaflex. Steiker also make one. We used their product as well. And when we could get hold of it, we also used Pavatextile, which is also from Pavatex, who do recycled cotton bats as well, which have got better acoustic insulation properties. So we tried to use those between the floors where we could. The sarking board is a Steiker product, and the permeable membrane comes from Pavatex. Play tiles, again, incredibly difficult to get hold of the ones that we had, the double Roman. So in the end, we had to salvage all the ones that we could, and then go with new tiles on one side of the house, and the existing tiles and a few secondhand ones on the other side of the house. There just weren't enough to do the whole thing with secondhand tiles. I mentioned MVHR, mechanical ventilation and heat recovery, a vital part of the whole plan. And we got Greengage to specify what capacity we would need. And we worked with a company called Luft, the other side for export, to help us with that. Basically what it does, it blows filtered air from outside into all of the living spaces after it's been warmed up by heat recovery from the exhaust air. And the exhaust air is taken specifically from the kitchen and from bathrooms and from WCs. So you don't need to have a separate air vent for your WC. It will take away smells, as well as it will take away hot air and damp air from the kitchen and the bathrooms. And that's expelled to outside after extracting, I think it's 96% of the heat in it. It's very impressive, very efficient. Two ways of doing it. You can either use a sort of branching network where you have a much bigger pipe going through the house and smaller ones going off to the rooms. We chose, because Luft preferred it, and they were the ones who were advising us, to use a radial layout, which is basically you have a couple of manifolds, one for all of the extract pipes and one for all of the supply pipes, which sit in the roof. There's the Q350. You can see those two pipes on the left are the, I think they are the exhaust pipes. And then you've got the ones coming in on the other side, which are well insulated. And they go up to the manifolds in the roof, two of them, and two of them go up to roof terminals, which send the air away. So I've talked about doing stuff yourself. You can be of any age if you recruit the family, as long as it's safe. We had scaffolding up all around the house, so I was perfectly happy for my grandson to be helping us with a bit of sanding and staining. But the most important guys are your team. And as I said, we chose to work with really good people who all trusted each other. We made sure they were well fed all the time. They got coffee and biscuits at 10 o'clock every day, and they get a cup at lunchtime, which my wife and I took it in turns to make. And this was like the after party, when I think we even ran to pizza and smoked salmon. We have a really good relationship still with all of those people. They've come to do some other work with us. It's absolutely vital that you trust your suppliers. And they learned with us on the job, and they can now take that expertise out to other people that they work with. I just put some of these down. This is in a weird order. Sam has kindly said that he would send these out to people if you're interested. These are the people that we worked with supplying all of those materials. That's me.
Well, I only wish you lived in Dorset. You could give us your expertise more locally rather than going to Swindon.
Yeah. The Greengage are just near us, so they're sort of in the West Country, and I think they will travel, but they're really good.
So, how many people have heard of a building physicist before? Not many. So. Yeah. Well, okay. So now we're on to question and answer or points, and the way we're going to do this is we're going to alternate between you putting up stuff in the chat, and Colin's going to pick out common themes on the one hand, and then directly putting up your hand in the reactions. In your reactions thing, if you have reactions, you can raise your hand, and they will, as you can see, Ian Duckworth's quick off the mark. He's got his first question in. But if you want to either put up your hand or send something to the chat, then we'll try to deal with them alternately as they go. So, Ian, do you want to unmute and can we see you? Or
You can. There I am. Yeah. Okay. Well, I got a couple of questions actually. One is to Jason, because he was talking about the skills deficit for people, to do the kind of retrofitting work that's needed. How does, I mean, I'm not speaking personally, but I have a son who might be directed in that way. So where would one go to get the necessary skills acquisition? How and where?
So a good starting point would be the level 2 course on the Retrofit Academy. Is your son in Dorset?
Yeah.
So the other place to potentially start is to speak to Weymouth College, because they're running retrofit skills boot camps, which are currently free, but they're time limited because, again, that was a funded program from central government. So that's a good place to start. If your son is looking to get into the more technical management or the installation side, do you think?
I think he would be better suited to the installation side, but I mean, he is not qualified in building at all at the moment.
Okay, that's fine.
His skills are elsewhere at the moment, but he's looking to move, from hospitality, where he's quite successful at the moment, into something more constructive.
Okay.
And therefore, it's a case of, does he have first of all to go to college to learn building skills before getting involved with these later developments?
Potentially. So, I mean, all of the colleges will offer different programs, and some of the apprenticeships will only be 1 day a week in college, so 4 days a week on site. So there's still the earning potential. There is still the apprenticeship levy and apprenticeship funding to undertake. A lot of the colleges are now putting sustainable modules in. We are, as part of our skills group, we're trying to write full, retrofit and zero carbon skills qualifications, with the end aim that they also come out of it with the accreditation, the PAS accreditation, Trustmark accreditation. If he's looking to join a company that is going down that road, and there aren't so many of them, then look on the Trustmark website and see which companies have actually got PAS 2030 accreditation, because it means that's the route they're moving down. They're moving towards a sustainable skill set. So,
Right.
So those are some good starting places.
Thank you. The Trustmark website, is that as it sounds? Trustmark?
Yeah, Trustmark is one word. Yeah, basically Trustmark is it's the register for companies that have got PAS accreditation or who do work to that sort of specific standard. So it's like a quality standard, a quality mark, basically.
Right. Okay, thanks very much for your help.
You're welcome.
My other question is personal, because I live in a house where we've just been trying to retrofit to some extent. I mean, I'm just awed by the kind of detail and the kind of precision and depth to which we've been subjected to this evening. I'm just in a situation where I'm just trying to do what I can to improve my insulation of my house, and at the moment it has a 60s loft conversion, which means it was not done without adequate insulation. And in the lofted section, they basically created a framework and plasterboard on the inside, and they hung insulating wool on the other side of the wall, and then covered that with plastic sheeting. I want to improve that. Do I need to remove that plastic sheeting before adding any further insulation?
Not necessarily. I think if you're depends on the ventilation in the around the rafters. If that's adequate, then it's not you're not looking at a breathable system anyway, because what you're doing, the air that comes in through the eaves potentially is what keeps the rafters from rotting. It's what stops them from staying wet all the time. So as long as that ventilation is adequate, then you don't need to have any sort of breathability in the roof system itself there. So if you've already got breathability is, so I am a building physicist, sorry. Breathability is it's a funny term. We tend to use the word vapor permeable now. So if
Yeah.
what you've got there isn't permeable to vapor,
Yeah.
there's no point in putting anything vapor permeable on top of it.
Right.
If it's already impermeable, you can just carry on, if that
Right.
makes sense. But the
Yeah, no, it
ventilation
does,
to the
yeah.
rafters is the important bit.
Yeah. Okay, so in other words, I should make sure anything I put on top is just leaves sufficient ventilation at the rafters and below, presumably.
Yeah, but you might need to consult a structural engineer, because when I did my house the same, it turns out that our rafters were only 3x2 and they were on their side. So I had to strip everything back because I couldn't hang any more weight on the roof. So
Right.
if you've got a way of trying to measure that, you might want to just do a pilot hole. And
I'm not going to hang anything on the roof. I'm only talking about the walls,
Oh, okay, right, okay,
which are vertical. Yeah.
right,
obviously.
I see, okay.
Well, again, thank you very much for your help.
Colin.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, we've got one question in the chat from Annabelle Delisle. I hope that's how you pronounce your name. We have a grade 2 listed thatch and wanting to get off oil. Do we go towards hydrogen or stay on oil? There's also an answer from Peter Dunsby, but maybe come back to that afterwards. I don't know whether you can answer that, Jenny, can you?
Well, I wouldn't recommend hydrogen. I don't think it, as the reply says, it's possible at the moment, but a heat pump of some description, depending on the size and layout of the property, and that obviously would need listed building consent and a few other interventions as well, but that's the way to go.
Great, thanks, Jenny. I don't know whether Andy's or Jason got anything to add to that.
I think the bigger thing there, a heat pump is long-term the way to go. I think hydrogen has not got a place in domestic heating. Personally, I think there are too many technical challenges to it, as well as, especially in this country, any kind of sustainability credentials it might have. So a heat pump is a long-term solution, but I think the thing to look at immediately is the unit cost of your heat being supplied by oil compared to the unit cost that would be supplied by a heat pump. And I think from a financial perspective, that's the main consideration now. Otherwise, you definitely need to do some insulation. So where we are putting in heat pumps, we're only replacing storage heaters with heat pumps because we know that's going to reduce the cost to our residents. We're not replacing gas boilers with heat pumps at the moment until we do more insulation on those houses, because we've got to keep that cost down.
That makes a lot of sense. I totally agree with that. You were asking about hydrogen. It's just that actually the amount of hydrogen which is made in a green way is vanishingly small, and the oil companies are doing their best to promote their hydrogen, which is from fossil fuels, as being a green solution, and it isn't.
Great, thank you very much.
Should we go to the next question? Thanks very much. Frank, did you come here?
Oh, hello. Yes, thanks for that. I'm Frank Morris from Sustainable Wareham. None of the speakers mentioned costs. I just wondered if they could give me some idea of likely costs involved in retrofit. What are the grants available for the members of the public, and what sort of payback are they going to get from this investment?
That's a very big question, because it all depends what you do, and it all depends what your starting point is, and what measures you're willing to put in now or in the longer term. So, for example, you know, we saw that the feed-in tariff brought the cost of solar panels down from, you know, £5,000 a kilowatt installed down to about £1,200 a kilowatt installed. So the answer today won't necessarily be the answer next year either. That's not an answer at all, and I apologize for that. I think what I always try and urge people to do is to try and benchmark their house. So if you can find out what your heating use is in terms of kilowatt hours a year and divide that by the floor area in square meters, that tells you where your starting point is, if that makes any sense. So most houses I've assessed in the past go from sort of 100 kilowatt hours per meter square of floor area per year up to 300. If you're down at that low end, you're doing pretty well. If you're up at that high end, the real thing to look at is how you use your energy before you start trying to make any other interventions, really. I think, as Jenny was saying, with the top of that the energy hierarchy is always look at what you're using now and how you can reduce that by behavior and by smaller interventions before you start throwing technology or bigger measures at it, because otherwise you just mask poor energy use.
Payback's a difficult one because A, you don't know what the price of fuels will be. Number two, you're going for a cozy house as opposed to a cold house. Number three, you're passing on a nicer house when you sell it or when you pass it on to your children. So, you're not necessarily getting, pounds, a number of years you get the money back, because it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think I would add to that by saying we don't expect to get payback. Possibly in my lifetime we will, but that's not why we did it. We did it to be comfortable, and we did it so that we would create a pleasant place to live, because it was really uncomfortable before. And we did it as a gift to the planet. And we're very, very fortunate that we can do that.
Great, thank you both. So we have a
Sorry, just a good starting point is if you know someone who's a retrofit assessor, ask them to come and do an assessment, because then they'll give you, they're not just necessarily supposed to, because the retrofit assessor shouldn't be actually making recommendations. But if it's someone friendly that you know, they can give you an idea of what's possible in your house and which measures might be the best ones to take. But definitely getting some professional advice is the first way to go, really.
Great, thank you. So we got another question from Susan Gaisford. Can an air source pump be connected to a traditional radiator heating system, or is it more efficient to use underfloor heating or some other system?
Yes, I would say it can do, but it is more efficient if you can have underfloor heating. And if you do use the existing radiators, I mean, don't be persuaded by the plumber or fitter that you need to first upgrade all your radiators, because I found that wasn't necessary. Because it depends what temperature you like your bedrooms to be. But if you're like a low, gentle heat, then it will be fine.
I think the thing to consider really is that a heat pump has to work very differently from a gas boiler. You don't whack it up to 25 in a day and turn it off at night. You need it to be fairly consistent to get the efficiencies out of it. So while it's generally recommended to upgrade your radiators to larger size because you've got a lower heat output from them per square meter of area of the radiator, it's not necessarily the case, as Jenny just said. Once it's up to heat, as long as you try and keep it consistent, it'll be fine.
Yeah, that's definitely been our experience with our heat pump. Keep it continuously at quite a low temperature so the fabric of the house stays warm. But by doing that, you can keep it on much lower temperature. So most of the time we have ours on 17, and that's completely adequate, often with an extra jumper. Okay, Trudy.
Right, I've got a question about insulation. I've got a 1950s house. I don't have very much money, so I have to be really careful about what I do. I've done all of the energy saving behaviour stuff that I possibly can do. But I've got a large exposed external wall which gets driving rain, and it had cavity wall insulation pumped into it before we moved in. I had it taken out under the guarantee because it was causing so much damp. So we now don't have damp, but we also don't have an insulated wall. I'm just wondering whether there's any types of insulation that will be okay in a cavity wall, which is an exposed site, because we get driving rain from the back that comes straight across from Maiden Castle. So it's very, very exposed and gets quite wild on that side of the house. We still have cavity wall insulation on the front and back of the house, just not on that side wall. Just wondered if I got any advice on that, please.
Do you know what was taken out? Was it wool or was it bead?
Wool.
Yeah, so what's happened there is that driving rain, although it shouldn't, has penetrated the outer brick skin and has carried across the wool, because wool will transmit vapor across it.
Yeah.
Whereas the modern bead shouldn't,
Okay.
especially the grey bead.
Yeah.
Or you can get a pumped foam cavity insulation, which is in truth the only one that is recommended for the southwest where you've got that high exposure.
So
The-
pumped foam.
Yeah,
pumped
it's a
foam
pumped foam, so it's, you know, it's like spray foam. It's horrid.
one. Okay.
It's really horrid. But if it's going to be in your wall for 100 years, that's an argument you have to have with yourself, really.
Yeah.
The important thing is that the outside of the wall, the condition must be good. You need to make sure that there's no cracks. Even tiny cracks will allow moisture in. Some people seal it.
Yeah.
I have mixed views on putting a sealant on, because if you've got a weak point in the sealant, again, that becomes a weak point in the wall and allows moisture to transmit across. But
It
if
did
your
have
point,
sealant
if your
done.
pointing is good,
Yeah.
it does, you say?
Yeah, it was repointed about 7 or 8 years ago, and it had sealant put on it at that point, although I'm not sure whether that's still working or not. But we don't have damp coming through or anything anymore. We used to have, when the cavity wall insulation was in there, it had like rings where all the ties were and everything all went to the wall and the inside. It was horrible, which is why it was taken out under the guarantee of the company.
Yeah, I think one thing to consider, is it listed at all? Is there any listing?
No, it's just a
or
1950s ex-prison officer house. It's not anything.
no conservation area?
No,
So the other possibility is to fill it with bead and clad it.
right.
If you clad it, you're protecting the wall from the elements then, so that wind-driven rain isn't going on your wall, it's going on a cladding.
So do you mean like render? Is that,
No, like, you know, tongue and groove timber,
oh, timber,
timber, anything like that, which would just stop that rain from driving into the brick.
right, okay,
I think we've got time for
thank you.
maybe 2 short questions. Colin, did you have?
Yes, we've got one from Diane Cheshire. It's been partly answered by Jenny already, but there may be something else. I have cavity walls but poor rendering. I understand that this can cause problems. Maybe one for our building physicist.
I don't want to hog the question, sorry. Yes, it can cause problems. It definitely can, because what you're creating is essentially a channel for all the water that runs down that wall to go in one place. So if you've got an empty cavity, then shouldn't be an issue unless it gets carried across brick ties. If you've got a full cavity with wool in, it will cause an issue. So I would, try to address that. In some cases, it might just be patch repair or crack repair, but if it's blown, then it probably needs redoing anyway.
Right. And finally, Vanita.
Hello, thank you. I've got one really simple question and another question which I might have to consult with somebody afterwards. The simple question is, I'm taking over my late mum's flat. It's a 1-bedroom flat. She's got 2 north walls. It's a block of, I think, 7 flats, and it's really cold. I need to replace the skirting along there. And I was like, come on, you know, genius solution, eco retrofit solution. Have you got any ideas for what I could just put along there behind a new skirting? Would it be something like the Staco Flex?
Who'd like to answer that one?
Sorry, some of the question broke up. I didn't hear all of it, I'm afraid.
Sorry, 1-bedroom flat, north-facing walls. It's really cold sitting in the flat. There was damp. So where the skirting is, and I need to put new skirting, is there some material that I can put behind that to increase the insulation?
If the skirting is damp, you need to find the cause of that damp before you start putting, especially a breathable insulation in behind it, because otherwise that would just get wet and then not be any use at all. That suggests that there's potentially either a fabric issue or an internal condensation issue that's causing that. So is it the ground floor flat?
No, it's 2nd floor, and I've had the room repainted, so the damp is, it's kind of sealed, hopefully, for the moment. But the skirting is off, so I can see brick behind it. The brick looks nice.
Well, shall we move on from there? I'm not sure we've got a straight answer for that one. So I think we're getting to the end of our formal time. I just wanted to draw some conclusion on this. First of all, there is a worry that around Dorset, I'm constantly asked, you know, can you recommend somebody who retrofits, a consultant? Can you recommend somebody who can put in insulation? And we just seem to have a dearth of them around here. The Association for Environmentally Conscious Builders seems to have a sort of 2 members in Dorset, and they really don't, they're not operating anymore. It just seems to be a complete lack of the stuff around here. And then, you know, the builders, well, you know, many of them aren't running renewable energy courses in the colleges, and it's difficult to get hold of builders. How are we going to move that forward? That's very, I know it's something that Jason's looking at, but you know, how can we help that? And you know, is there a campaign that we should be writing to our MPs and trying to get people to you know, to put money into the colleges? For instance, the colleges will only provide apprenticeship if sort of 7 or 8 people are going to turn up for them. But this is the problem. Jenny, you've been looking at this particular problem, haven't you?
I have. I've spoken to several of the colleges within our area. And for example, Weymouth said that they weren't putting on any heat pump courses at all. But if I could find 6 or 7 companies who wanted to train an apprentice, they might reconsider. And also the installer that I've been in touch with said that he's trying to get an apprentice at the moment, but he has to re-register as a gas fitter, which he hasn't fitted any gas boilers for over 5 years, in order to take on an apprentice, which seems a very backward way of going about it. Do you know anything about that, Jason?
So we are working, so the skills group I'm chairing, we've got 7 FE colleges, we've got 5 or 6 private training providers and 3 specialist retrofit training providers. We've also got NOCN, who are National Occupational Standards Agency. We've got IFATE, who are the National Apprenticeship and Technology Agency. They're all pushing all these things. What we are lacking is a joined up approach. All of the LEPs in the Southwest all work separate to each other. All of them drew up their own local skills improvement plans last year, and none of those are coordinated with each other. And so we can't coordinate training across the region in that way. The good thing is what we've started to see as a result of the work that we've been doing and in other places across the country is that the FE colleges are now starting to work together. Whereas traditionally they worked in isolation and competition with each other, especially, you know, in the more rural parts of the country. But they are now starting to work together. So they're offering similar qualifications. They're starting to look at whether they can offer joint qualifications. So you do a module here in Weymouth and a module in Exeter, because, you know, Weymouth can't possibly put everything they want to teach on one campus. Neither can Exeter. So if Exeter specialise in heat pumps and Weymouth specialise in solar, and you want to send an electrician to do, say, a mixed electrical retrofit qualification, then they go and do a module at each. So those are the things we're looking at. We're trying to push the LEPs to work together so that next round of things they want to concentrate on really takes into account the needs of the region. And one of the things we're trying to push at the moment is with the Climate Change Committee to get a funding bid together so we can do a real regional piece of work, a real mapping piece of work about what our skills deficits are, what our existing workforce is and how we can tap into that, how we can train them, and what that might mean to the local economy. And that also applies to materials as well, because, you know, as Andy said, Andy, I thought your presentation was amazing, by the way. As Andy said, and I said as well, it's really difficult to get materials. So much of our materials have to come from Europe, which is now at the end of a dysfunctional supply chain, post-COVID and post-Brexit. And we've stopped making things in this country, and it doesn't make sense. You know, there's a whole half of Wales is monoculture woodland. Why aren't we turning that into either wood pellets or wood fibre insulation? Why is that thinking around the country, that joined up thinking, not taking place? And this is where the LEPs really need to get their act together, and central government. The problem with central government funding, as if you've spoken to the colleges, Chris Thorne from Weymouth would have told you, is that, and we found the same, government say, hey, we're going to spend, we're going to put 800 million into this in the next year or so. And then the day after, they launch the bid process and you've got a week to reply and 3 months to deliver. It's like they think we've all got hundreds of people sitting on their hands with perfect data, mobilized and ready to go. So the boot camps the colleges were running, they had to send their own teachers to learn the skills first before they could deliver them, which meant taking them out of their existing teaching time. And then they had to deliver that to so many people in 3 months. And then the program falls off a cliff. It's just nonsensical. Also that someone in Parliament can stand up and say, we invested £800 million this year. That's the only reason that's done. And the rest of us, we run around jumping through hoops like crazy for this stuff. And, if you looked at South Korea 50 years ago, they had a 100-year plan to become the biggest shipbuilder in the world. And they've done it. We can't put a year plan together and hold on to it. So, our whole sort of the way we look at balancing our economy needs to change, really.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Jason.
Sorry, as a rant, I apologise.
Very interesting.
Easy to
Perfectly justified.
So we're just about running out of time, and Sam mentioned at the very beginning that we have the Dorset Greener Homes, which is it's a project that Dorset Climate Action Network have been running for a couple of years, and Sam was running it along with others in West Dorset for up to 9 years before that. So it's where people who've made significant green changes to their homes open up for 2 weekends, the weekend of the 23rd of September and the 1st of October this coming year. Last year we had 60 homes open. So if you are on the verge of doing some work to your house and you need some information, you want to hear what it's like, say, living with heat pumps, batteries, solar panels, and how all those things can work together, please do come along and have a look at some homes. Keep an eye on our website. We're developing a new website to showcase the homes, and there'll be a lot of publicity coming out shortly.
And as much to the point as if you've done stuff on your home, particularly if you've done a low cost retrofit, a little bit of reduce your energy bills, and you're willing to talk about it, they're the people we want. We're trying to avoid getting grand designs, beautiful new buildings. We want to get people who've been down a journey who are willing to talk about it. That's our email address, and do write to us, Dorset Greener Homes, and you can find more information on our website, which is Dorset CAN.
DorsetCan.org. Yeah.
That might work or might not work.
So we're looking for new homes, like Sam was saying, but also if you're on the verge of doing something, please come and visit some of the homes to get some information.
This is the Dorset Climate Action Network website, and we employ a part-time administrator who does great work. Alex does, but we need to pay her, and we're always on the donate. And it's very easy to donate, particularly on our website. Every page has a donate button, and you can donate as little as £5 or £10. But if you would like to donate, we'd very much welcome it. So that's your retiring collection. But do feel free to do that if you're able to do it. So I think this is a good time to take a break. And I don't know if Jason, Andy, Jenny can stick around for a bit, for another half hour, for a sort of more informal chat. And we will be sending out stuff from the 3 presentations and the chat to you all, so you don't have to worry too much about that. So that 5-minute break and then resume.
Okay.
Go and fill up your cup of tea,
And if you are not going to stay on, thank you very much indeed for coming along. It's been great to see so many people here, but hopefully we'll see you in the virtual pub in 5 minutes.
Can I say the three presentations were just brilliant. You slotted into each other absolutely perfectly. And you know, I'm just really happy. So, you know, congratulations, all of you.
Yeah, just hands to thank you.
Just hands, yes. Thank you. A quick.
Great.
No.
Okay.
That's it. Right, how do we want to do this? Are people going to put up their hands when they want to speak, or how many people have got left? Got to turn off there.
Well done, Sam. All went really well.
Well, I've had some good speakers.
I thought brilliant. I love Jason.
Brilliant.
He's so good.
Well, he certainly knows his stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Colin, how do you want to do this? Do we want to sort of have people put up their hands?
I think that's probably the best bet, to have some people to put up hands. I'd like to ask Peter Dunsby. You seem to be very well informed. Do you have some kind of background in the building trade or renewable heating and so on?
I hope I haven't been making too much of a nuisance of myself with my replies. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah.
I run my own installation business. I'm not a hands-on person, so I employed people and worked with contractors in some cases. But we were past 2030 accredited. I did this until about late 2019, and did I think every type of installation that was referenced in the presentation. We weren't past 2030 accredited for draft proofing. Very few people were, because it just wasn't worthwhile. And then after that, I did heat pumps. Has been a passion for many years, and I spent a year doing heat pump design and sales. More recently, and in fact, just I'm doing a little bit of a side gig here as well, supporting a village. It's actually a town, but it's called a village in the northeast of England that are going through proposed hydrogen trials. I've been doing that both with that town and also Whitby in the northwest, Ellesmere Ports, for the last 4 or 5 months. I know more about hydrogen heating than I ever imagined I would do. And I can talk people through that ad infinitum. Basically, there are 38 independent studies to none that were analysed by a personal contact called Dr. Jan Rosenau, all of which say that hydrogen has little or no place in home heating. It's the last roll of the dice for the fossil fuel industry. On the other hand, heat pumps, and I don't know if Jason's still around, but a well-designed heat pump, and I'll be the first to admit that there are far too many of them that are not well designed and not well installed, but a well-designed, well-installed heat pump should be cheaper to run than gas at today's prices. And I'll happily put him in touch with people who could organise that work for him if he's interested. I can see you there, Jason. Hello.
Yes, I can kind of back that up, because we had a heat pump put in 18 months ago, We've also got solar panels and a battery, and combining all those all those three, we haven't paid any electricity at all for 14 months now. So it's working. The system for us is working very, very well, but the house is extremely well insulated as well. So I think we're on an A-rated EPC now.
Yeah, there are quite a few sort of considerations with heat pumps. So there were some studies done sort of 15 years ago as to why the same heat pump being fitted in Britain wasn't performing anywhere near as well as the exact same heat pump being fitted in, say, Stockholm. And there was so much to do with commissioning and the design of the installation and the handover and so on. That's improved now. We do have better fitters now. We do have better industry training. I think one of the other things about heat pump, which when I joined Magna, I was quite surprised to discover that we had about 500 homes with heat pumps fitted. So the first thing I did was survey those people to see what their experience of their heat pump was. And when the results came back, there was a really even 50-50 split between people who loved them and people who hated them. And I drilled a bit deeper down, and unfortunately, it's been the same story with other sort of social housing providers that I've worked with before. We're very, very good at installing things in people's homes while they live in them and then telling them how to use them properly. What we're not so good at is when someone moves into a home with an existing bit of technology, is providing that same level of backup and guidance and education. And it worked out that basically all the people who hated their heat pump went into their home and treated it like a gas boiler because they didn't know any different. Yeah. So all the efficiencies went and all the costs went up.
Yeah.
So the education thing is something I push again and again. It's a massive thing, and especially when people aren't used to it. I think what we'll find is that our children are going to be fantastic at these things.
Yeah.
Because they'll grow up in homes that have got them. But we are not, because we're not used to that level of technology in our home.
I think that's the brilliant thing about the Open Homes scheme, the Dorset Greener Homes, is that now we've got quite a big group of people who have lived with this technology and know how to work it best and so on, and can offer that kind of advice from that experience.
It took me about 2 years tweaking temperatures and times to get it to get COPs above 3, more than 300% efficient. But it's taken some time, just turning the underfloor heating down to 30 degrees, being the standard temperature. Well, a radiator is what, 45 degrees, 50 degrees? And you just get used to the fact when you get cold, you don't just turn it up and then expect it to be warmer in 5 minutes. It'll take 3 hours.
I think so. I mean, we had a water source air heat pump for a while, and then we switched to air because the water supply failed. And we're on our second lot of air source heat pumps, and I think they are more complicated than a gas boiler by a country mile for the average person. Not for a professional probably, but for the average person. I think the control systems and everything else, the DCAN control systems, I found non-intuitive. Yeah. Whereas a gas boiler programmer is dead easy.
Some of them are. That's quite interesting, because controls and designs and stuff like that. So there's a lady called Fionn Stevenson who used to work at Sheffield University, did a piece of work about 15 years ago now on heating controls. And she did a massive focus group, and there were something like 39 companies in the UK that designed and sold heating controls, and only one of those companies actually ran focus groups during their design time. And when blindly she put these focus groups that she'd put together for her research through a period where they got to learn all of these control systems, and all the groups came back and said that one company is by far the best because they were designed for people. Whereas I love engineers, but they speak a different language to the rest of us, and when they design things, they're not necessarily intuitive.
I totally agree.
So which company was that then, Jason?
I honestly can't remember. I'm really sorry. If you look for Fion Stevenson, it's FFION. So there aren't many of them. If you Google Scholar Fion Stevenson's work about heating controls, you'll find that. Someone was asking earlier about trying to find contractors. So I just quickly, if people will indulge a second. Oh, blimey, okay. I just quickly went to the Trustmark website. So can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the Trustmark website. And let me just refresh it a minute, because when it comes up there is find your local tradesperson. So you can put in the town. So let's just say, I don't know, Dorchester. That's where Magna are based. And if I wanted to find someone who fitted internal wall insulation, internal solid wall insulation, internal wall, you've got those, and then you click on that, find the tradespeople, and it's I think the thing with the AECB is that they've not necessarily maintained that level of membership. So there you've not got many, but you've got Low Carbon Exchange, who we're using for all of our retrofit. They're a fantastic company. So although they're in Somerset, they do generally cover the entire country, but you can essentially put in your area and the trade you're after, and then it will return all the results where these people have got Trustmark accreditation. So they'll work to PAS 2030 standards, or if it's renewables, they'll work to MCS, so the micro, can't remember what it is now, my brain stopped working. But
generation
certificate,
Micro generation, yeah.
Exactly that.
generation certification.
So Trustmark's a good place to go if you're not getting any good return on the AECB website.
Why do you think there were no reviews in what you say is a really, really good supplier? That suggests that people aren't using that site in the way that they should.
It possibly does. I think we are still at the stage where we're not necessarily. I think that's a reflection on the market as much as anything else. There are still not enough people. They were fantastic. There were 70 odd people on this call. That's brilliant. But that's not really a representation of the population as a whole in terms of those who are looking at retrofitting, I think. Oh, and with the knowledge to actually go and find those right people, we still tend to treat building as building, so we get a builder, and that that can be great or it can be disaster, as you found out, Andy. You found these people and they were willing to go through that knowledge,
the education process, and they were taking home homework at the weekend, so it was I was really pleased.
But that's not
typical.
It's not typical. I don't want to besmirch anybody, but it's not typical of the industry.
No.
The administrative burden of becoming, and it's got worse since my company left the industry, of becoming PAS 2030, PAS 2035 approved is very significant, unfortunately. There are good reasons for it, but it's not going to be for many small businesses.
I do agree with that. I think the thing to look at is that I know a lot of contractors. We speak to a lot of contractors who have invested in training for solar panels. They invested in training for green homes grants, for and the technical professionals who invested in eco homes and things like that. And then these things, the rug gets pulled out, and what that does tend to do is taint them from investing again in the future, for the fear that the rug will get pulled out from that market. But when it comes to working for social housing, we're in this, we're doing this. We're not going away from this. We've got 150,000 homes across the Southwest. That's 115 homes a week. There's plenty of room in there for smaller contractors who specialize to either go to the client and say, this is what we do, this is our accreditation, or potentially to look around with other small contractors and form a bigger consortium that can then do whole house retrofit. So if you don't want to, the thing with PAS 2030 is you have to get the accreditation in every single measure. But if you're an SME that specializes in one measure, then find one that specializes in another, and work together as a consortium so that you can offer whole house retrofit.
As you were talking, Jason, I find it hard to even recognize this in myself, because it was a painful process, a lot of the things you've just described. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I had some great years in 2012, 2014 doing eco work, and I'm really proud of the work that we did do, the bonded bead cavity wall installation. We worked hard to do quality work for people, some fantastic stuff where other companies just wouldn't have gone there. I remember injecting rock wool into a mansard roof where for an anchor property, it was shared ownership. Anchor was the freeholds, and most of the properties had been sold off to a block of flats. And the terminally ill lady on the top floor there, and because of the lack of insulation, this property was heating up to unbearable levels at times. It was got a case study from them as well. The property was well into the 40s and possibly even higher at times, and the lady had to be taken downstairs in a wheelchair. And if people think about insulation, I mean, you talked about overheating. People think about insulation for cold, but I know for a fact that injecting rock wool into that roof, A, wouldn't have been done by very many other companies in the country, and B, made a hell of a lot of difference both in the summer and the winter. So it's great that we were able to do that. And I hear what you're saying about social housing. I am working on something, and with some great people as well. Solid wall installation. You made a great point there that September is getting late in the year. You've obviously got that spot on.
Not necessarily the contract though.
I
delivery now.
I did my share of that as well, and it's a pain in the arse once we get into the government schemes don't help, because you end up with a government scheme that requires delivery for a certain point in the year, and it's the last thing you want to be doing at that point. But equally though, I don't have the answers to this sort of thing. Maybe I'm sure you've thought about it. You're obviously a deep thinker. What does your workforce look like if you're going to deliver solid wall insulation at scale? You basically, I think, have to have them doing something else in the winter, whether that's internal wall insulation, whether it's floor insulation. I don't know what the answer is. They've got to be multi-skilled though in some way, because they ain't doing external wall insulation.
Yeah, it's really difficult from a sort of strategic level. This is where I struggle to get sufficient bandwidth at exec level. I'm not knocking our execs, don't get me wrong. I'm sure everybody's in this position, but they're still, and I know it probably sounds poor now, but they're still struggling. Like social housing, we're still struggling with COVID backlogs. You know, we lost a year's worth of work. And that's important to those people who are expecting a kitchen, and to those people who are expecting a new boiler, and to those people who are expecting new windows, and all just the general repairs that we've got. And it's strained our workforce to its limits. So actually saying to the exec, oh, we need to take on this many people, or we need to think about external wall installation for the next 20 years. Are we going to contract that out? Are we going to do that in-house? What does that workforce look like? They're going, you know, and now they're struggling with damp and mold. So the pressures on the exec are manifold to make those strategic decisions. I think that if you've got multi-skilled operatives, that's your best bet, because in the summer they can do EWI, and in the winter they can go and do kitchens.
Great. Jason, can I interrupt there? We've got Will Bond with a hand up. Will, would you like to make your comment or question?
Just to say, I mean, thank you, Jason and Magna, for actually kind of getting to grips with it, because I installed a district heating scheme in my village. I'm a little rural landowner. We've got a dozen cottages, houses on our wood chip fired system, and it's interesting at the degree to which it is a cultural problem. And people who are on the call tonight obviously are motivated, they're interested, they will tend to adapt to fit how renewable works. But for the general people, and particularly, we have one house, quite a nice big house that's let to people from London and so on. They come down for a weekend in Dorset's rural countryside and see how we all live. And of course, they expect the radiators to be at 9 million degrees. You know, you turn them on and you expect the heat to come firing out of them, this great thing. And actually, the idea of just having heat that is gently trickling out all day long is alien to them. And really, until we can get the wider population to recognize that the traditional gas boiler configuration is not the be all and end all, we are going to be an uphill struggle. And I think if Jason and Magna are getting that message out to a broader audience of people who learn to accept that this is a different way of working, I think that's really brilliant, really helpful, and thank you.
Well, we're not. I mean, I think the thing is that the culture does change. You know, we are only a generation and a half into gas boilers. Before then, we used to pile the clothes on and go to sleep in unheated bedrooms. You know, so central heating in itself is not something that we've lived with for generations and generations. We've still got customers, believe it or not, who are in there. Actually, customers. There's no one from Magna on the call. I hate that word. We have to use the word customers. I think it's despicable. We've still got residents who are in their 90s who refuse to have a gas boiler fitted because they don't trust them. So, you know, we're not that far away from that culture change as well. So, you know, there is hope for that change to happen again. And it is just a case of time and experience. Unfortunately, we do live in a media world where any heat pump goes wrong makes front page news. And you know, as was said earlier, the you know, the gas companies, because they've got this massive infrastructure of gas pipes everywhere, they want to push hydrogen. And they've got the lobbying power and the advertising power to do that. But I think what you do for Dorset Green Homes and what, you know, Bristol Green Doors, Oxford Open Homes, London Eco Homes, what that does is give the public the opportunity to go and see that these things can work. And they don't necessarily, you know, as was said, they don't necessarily have to come from a grand designs perspective. You know, these are people taking their normal homes and greening them.
Yeah.
And that can only be a positive thing in terms of changing that culture.
Great, thanks, Jason. All right, we've got 2 questions. I think then probably we're out of time, Sam, aren't we?
Yes. Can I just say that Will Bond is due to appear at our next production, which is Onshore Wind on the 21st of June. So the energy group of DCAN will feature Will Bond, who is the chairman of Alaska Wind Farm, and he'll be able to talk about the obstacles then. Sorry, I thought I'd chuck that in. So Steve.
Sam, sorry, sorry to jump in there. If you're looking at onshore wind next time, have you spoken to the Energy Local groups? Because Bridport Energy Local run, you know, they run from an onshore wind turbine was their first start, and it's a way something that other people can get involved on a community basis as well. Yeah,
well, yeah, we got Jeannie Averill talking about the Sliers Lane thing. Pete doesn't want to do it this time, but yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Good point. Steve.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I very much agree with what's just been said about people being very much wedded to the idea of baking hot radiators. I've just started to do upgrades on my house, and I've installed a couple of air-to-air heat pumps, but it's basically HVAC units on the wall, and the performance and the simplicity of them seem to outstrip the traditional air-to-water solution that everybody seems to be following by an awful long way.
So this is warm air heating, Steve, yeah?
Yeah, they're basically, well, they're HVAC units, so we'll do air conditioning, heating and cooling.
Yeah.
One of the problems I have had is getting baked in the summer because we're on a southwest facing hillside next to the sea, and the loft was hitting, you know, plus 40 on many occasions. So the heating, the cooling in the summer is valuable. I've insulated the loft with a double foil filmed bubble wrap type thing, and that seems to have greatly cut out the solar gain up there, and the ventilation is no problem, and the wall mounted units move the air around the house quite nicely.
That's really interesting. I'm actually a very big fan of warm air heating. It doesn't qualify for renewables.
Indeed.
For reasons that I can't quite explain, but I fitted warm air, or I specified warm air heat into some village halls in Somerset that were suffering a lot from mold because they were used, you know, intermittently.
Yes. And
you know, the problem with their existing heating system was you came in, turned it on, and just as you were leaving, the building was getting warm. And then it got cold again, and then all the moisture that you'd put in the air there would condense on the walls. That warm air heating was running at sort of 16 degrees day in, day out, and they bump it up to 18 when they came in, and the health of the building has just improved dramatically. User satisfaction, I'm a big fan personally.
And they're a lot cheaper as well.
Can be.
Well, mine were probably, I would say I got them probably for about 35% the cost of what an air to water system would have set me back.
Yeah, interesting.
They're going to be more efficient because you're missing out the exchange.
Yes.
Taking the heat from the air into the water. The downsides, and I'm not a building physicist, I'm a chartered accountant and banker that has grappled over 10 years with the technical side of things, but I would definitely defer to experts in many instances. The downsides, though, is air has a much lower energy density than water, the water that you'd have in radiators. So they'll heat up quicker, but they'll also cool down quicker. Well, the air will anyway. And you're not going to heat up water in a cylinder with an air-to-air heat pump.
No, that's very true. I mean, I've also got solar panels and a battery, so the hot water isn't really an issue. But yeah, you need a complete system design. I agree.
So we're running out of time, and we've got one more question from Trudy, or one more comment, and then I think we'll have to wrap up, Sam.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've really enjoyed hearing what everybody's had to say, and it's fascinating hearing about all these buildings and what everyone's doing. I'm just wondering whether Dorset can may able at some point to do a sort of session for people like me, who probably the majority of the population really, who are homeowners who are on lower incomes and don't have money to do whole house retrofits and need to try and prioritise and just try and work out what grants are out there to help us and where we go with these things. I've written down a few points there, but there's a lot of people out there who are just trying to think, well, I've got £2,000 in the bank, you know, how am I gonna use that to the maximum possibility? And you know, I love listening to all of these things about people do these whole house things. I'm fascinated by it, but I can't imagine ever being able to be in a position of doing that.
Rudy, I would definitely say go to Bridgewater Energy.
Bridgewater Energy.
Bridgewater Energy. They are Dorset based, and they will come and assess your home.
Yeah.
They'll ask you for your income level, because a lot of the grants are based on income eligibility.
Yeah.
As well
universal
as
credit, you see. So I'm an NHS worker and I work not far off full time, but I'm also on universal credit.
Yeah. So these things. So the eco funding, energy company obligation funding, works on this thing called Eco Flex. So it's there are flexible criteria to be able to access it, and this is essentially money that the privatized utilities have to spend on making our least efficient homes more efficient.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me as though you are an ideal candidate to get Eco 4 or potentially home upgrade grants.
Yeah.
But Bridgewater will do that, and they'll advise you on it as well.
Okay, because I did leave a message for Eco 4 for an advert thing that I found for it, but I didn't get, nobody got back to me, so I'll contact I'll
Yeah.
contact them and see whether
They also operate LEAP, which stands for they will come and assess your home for free. They are kind of overrun at the moment. If you, where do you live, Trudy?
Dorchester.
Dorset.
Yeah.
So I mean, for instance, in Bridport, we're sort of I don't know if Caroline Pierce is still here, but you know, we've put together about 30 houses, applications for LEAP to come along and do the assessment.
Okay.
Which
I was
is
just thinking that, but
Oh,
yeah, I could perhaps refer, even though you're not Bridport, I could still probably do that. So
so.
Yeah.
so
Trudy, there are quite a lot of measures that you can do that are very cheap.
Yeah.
That I did mention, like the window draft proofing, door draft proofing, skirting boards, look under those, see if they need draft proofing.
Yeah.
And then in the winter, the secondary glazing or thick curtains, you can just use a blanket to put inside the curtains. It doesn't have to be anything, you know, very expensive.
Yeah. We've got double glazed windows, but they are quite old, I think. But yeah.
I'd add an endorsement for Ridgewater as well. They were a company that my company did some work with, and they in turn get a lot of their funding from another company called Agility, who are first class. The whole kind of chain there is really well set up for what you're talking about, your needs.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah,
point.
I'll talk to them about that.
We could try to run a DCAN thing on the how we can do low energy. That'd be very useful. And I could put you in touch with
Yeah.
Caroline.
yes,
Yeah, thank
do.
you. That'd be great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Leslie, it's a quick one. You're muted still.
Just to say to Trudy, really, I contacted Leap, managed to get an assessment, and it was really handy, Trudy. He was full of fantastic ideas. He went through your bills with you and showed you sort of, you know, I mean, I was quite a low user, but he explained all sorts of things that I hadn't known. And I'm actually a Bridport Energy champion, so I've done a lot of training, but there was still extra things. So it's definitely worth getting them, even if they don't, I mean, they didn't really, actually he did put in these special plugs that I've got a remote for now, so that I don't have things on standby, and bought in the LEDs for anything that I hadn't got an LED for. But you know, it wasn't like loads of money, but definitely telling you where best to save your energy. So yeah, I'd really recommend that. But talk to Sam and Caroline, and Jenny, really, all that stuff that we did on that energy hierarchy, I think could make it really good.
Yeah, I've done a lot of them. I've got noon plugs, I've got all LED lights, I've got, you know, I've done lots of the things that like I can do. But yeah, there are other things I could do. We don't really have much in the way of curtains in our house. We've got some blinds.
Yeah, curtains are big, and not just curtains, but or blinds, but having them with the bump on so that they're really padded, that made a huge difference in my sitting room.
Well,
the sitting room is the hot room because we only used a wood burner. So we don't really have the heating on anymore. So we only have one room warm. So generally, so it's yeah.
That was what I factored in for my heating this year, and then I've got this sinus problem, so I can't put the wood burner on now. So that's good. But
so,
I put more on the hierarchy, couldn't we?
Yeah, have a look at that again. Yeah, that's be.
I think we'll wrap it up there.
Yeah,
thank you. Overrun already, but I'd really like to thank Jason and Jenny and Andy for the really brilliant contribution. Thank you very much. You've done a huge amount of work at it, and those very useful contributions from the discussion. And we've obviously got a lot to go on with that. A lot will be connected in the notes. So thanks very much for attending, and thanks very, very much for your hard work. And we're signing off now. Thank you.
Thanks
Very
for
nice
having
to
us.
meet you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.